Obviously today has been really focused on, the effect of COVID on our industry. So we've gathered a bunch, some serious experts here to talk about their various perspectives on this pandemic and how we're all going to get back to work and continue to work safely and maximize productivity. So everyone's just kind of joining in here. I'm going to do a quick roundtable introduction. I'm Tom Strong, President and CEO of CanBIM. Everyone already knows me today. Maybe Mark, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, Mark Bryant. I have the privilege of being the CIO of PCL Construction. We operate in heavy industrial, civil, and buildings across primarily North America and Australia. Happy to be here today. Thanks for hosting.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us. It's great to have PCL's, in one of my opinion, one of the most sophisticated, successful builders in North America, largest general contractor in Canada. Really great to have the CIO with us. So thank you, Mark, for joining us. Randy, do you want to jump in and introduce yourself? Randy, you're on mute. You're there you go. You'll have to start over.
Can you hear me now? Sure. Yeah. My name's Randy Kray. I'm Senior Vice President of HOK Architects and Director of our Science and Technology practice. So I bring to this conversation some perspective on designing, having spent 20 years designing facilities where infectious disease agents sort of exist with people and keeping people safe where there are biohazards in them. So I bring a bit of a biosafety perspective to this conversation and what the new workplace and will be like in the future for COVID.
Yeah, really thankful to have you here, Randy. I appreciate your perspective, and I just find it really interesting that HOK has someone with your level of expertise with that size, that kind of focus. I guess that's the advantage of being a really big firm, is that you can have people with your level of expertise inside the firm helping with these specialized projects. And as the world changes here, that expertise is becoming more and more in demand, I think. So, anyways, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to move on to Alex.
Yeah, hi. I very much am looking forward to this session, and I appreciate being invited to be here. I'm the economist for a company called ConstructConnect, which is we follow construction projects through all their stages, and we publish statistics and forecasts and so on. And so that's what I do. I write about the economy, and I participate in the forecasts that we calculate along with Oxford Economics in the UK. And I've been doing this for a very long time. Doesn't mean that I know anything, but I've been doing it for a very long time.
Well, I've been reading your work for my whole career, pretty much, in the Daily Commercial News.
Yeah, Daily Commercial News.
Yeah, so really, I mean, obviously, a lot of our audience is from Canada, and we're all familiar with. We used to be familiar with Reed Construction Data, which your company, and you came over with that acquisition, I think. But
yes.
You've been writing about the construction economy in Canada for as long as I've been in the industry. So, anyways, really appreciate meeting you here, and thanks for joining us. I'm going to move on to David.
Hi. I'm with Altus Group. Altus is a global firm that has consulting and software and data services in the real estate industry. I'm a senior director in the cost and project management business unit, where I manage a team for our business intelligence, so structuring, collecting, and commercializing data from our cost and project management business unit.
And you're also a pretty successful entrepreneur, having run your own business, which got acquired by Altus. And I mean, I think it's very, what you're doing right now around developing the data strategy for Altus, that's very cutting edge work, and that's an area of growth across our whole industry. And as a builder, my experience has been in general contracting, and really our primary focus is communication and getting in collaboration, pulling all the entities together. But then the secondary focus is likely data, whether we realize it or not. We produce schedules, estimates, building science. All these things are very data oriented, and I think it's super important that Altus is driving down that direction. So looking forward to the conversation. So I'm going to start with Mark. So Mark, generally, PCL operates a lot of different job sites around North America, and I'm sure it's different from market to market, sector to sector, project type. But have you seen a big shift in the workforce? Obviously, you're moving. A lot of the areas, especially in Canada, has probably moved to more work at home environment. And if you're looking after the IT infrastructure for your business, I'm sure that's been a huge challenge. We heard earlier from HOK around that subject. So from a general contractor's perspective, what have been the challenges, and have you had to stand up any new IT infrastructure to facilitate the work from home requirements?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Generally speaking, we were in the cloud. We've been in the cloud first company for several years now. So
Mark, we just we're already in our technical. Maybe just start from the top there. You just cut out for a second.
Oh, okay. I just mentioned, assuming you can hear me now, yes?
Yep.
Yeah. Fortunately for us, we were a cloud first based organization, so we didn't have to spin up a lot of net new communication infrastructure. But it's probably one of the bigger challenges for us on job sites was around workforce safety. Certainly, one of those of us who are of the corporate type, like myself, in business technology and other corporate departments that can do work remotely. As a builder, we still have lots of men and women in the field at the workplace of construction. So our bigger challenges there wouldn't have been technology related; they would have been safety related. So how do we properly social distance? There's challenges, for example, in lifts, getting materials and people up and down on a job site. And so, our VP of safety and his team and the folks in our district offices spent a lot of time figuring out how we could keep job sites going, but doing it safely in all aspects of our business. And that had a lot of impact, certainly on how many people we could have on a site, shifting people during different times in different time zones. And then, of course, keeping pace with local government changes and regulations that may have varied, as you noted, by province or state or by country. So less of a technology challenge for us, fortunately, due to some investments we made in the previous year. So we were pretty fortunate. I know some of our competitors weren't as fortunate and had to scramble. But for us, technology wasn't a big barrier.
Are you deploying any new technologies on the job site, or reutilizing the tools that you already have on the job site related to mobile in a new way, perhaps around contact tracing or safety procedures orientation?
Definitely a lot of work done in safety and orientation procedures. Certainly, we're trying to get office folks back into the office today. We have an application that we built called Visitor Valet that allows staff to check in through QR code, and we know when staff are coming on site. And there's a COVID questionnaire that we've embedded in that. Visitor Valet was originally designed to check visitors in that are seeing other PCLers, but we've now used it and augmented it to help us manage the COVID situation. Yeah,
because I know in Ontario, at least, they were saying that there was a responsibility with the general contractor to be able to backsite interactions between workers on job sites. That's a complicated challenge on a job site that's very dynamic.
It is, Tom, and I would mention on that, probably 30 or 40 organizations, technology organizations out there today that we're looking at that have COVID tracing technology in place. Some of it is bleeding edge new, and so there's lots of companies out there trying to solve the problem. We have yet to find something that is robust enough where you don't have to have a phone on you with an application open, et cetera, et cetera. So some of these tracing apps that you see that the governments have released have a lot of really strict specifications and requirements for them to work properly. And they're great in concept. We haven't found anything that's fantastic yet.
Yeah, and probably the best things would use some sort of biometric data gathering thing, which then gets into issues around confidentiality and data collection on workers and union issues. But I do think that over time that we're going to see some changes, and I think people are going to realize that these things are just important overall to help manage productivity on job sites. So I'm gonna move on to Randy. Randy, I mean, we did talk to Mark from HOK earlier about the impact to your kind of working habits and all the technology that HOK needed to stand up. But are you, from your perspective, I mean, you're working out of the US, I believe, right? Have you seen any long-term impacts to the way you're operating? Do you think that some of these things are going to stick, sort of the mobile technologies and whatnot, and change the way that you interact internally or with your clients?
I think that we absolutely will change, or at least reevaluate the basis for working in place and working together and collaborating in our business as we go into the next phases of needing to shelter in place and have the ability to safely work together again. I think HOK as a knowledge-based company, and our client base, which are, you know, a lot of our clients we design workplace for, whether it's scientific or corporate workplace, you know, have sort of knowledge-based employees. And we've really had to learn a lot and really discovered quite a bit in having to work at home and shelter in place that we wouldn't have anticipated the maintenance of productivity and the ability to work collaboratively together like we've been able to do. So when we do have the green light to come back together, I think that's going to be in phases, and there's going to be different models for that, sort of a pre-vaccine and post-vaccine world.
Right.
We're still going to say, you know, for anywhere from 6 months to 18 months or 2 years, we've had to work this way. What did we learn, and how will we do things differently?
Yeah.
I know as a company, as an officer or a principal who probably was on the road 50 weeks of the year, 48 weeks a year, I now question, did I really need to be sort of on planes that much doing my work in the past, for the past 20 years? And so we'll be reevaluating that and determining, coming back together for the right reasons, not just because that's the way it's always been done.
Yeah, I mean, if you're managing a team, or especially if you're interacting with a client, building trust and camaraderie it's of primary importance, right? So that is one of the challenges. I mean, right now, obviously, we all have to do this. We all just have to get used to it. But I do think that there's definitely going to be a long-term social requirement for people to enjoy their work and also to build trust across these groups, especially when you're collaborating on design. Which kind of leads to my next question. Like your area of expertise is obviously, you know, working on like hospital projects and life science projects where infectious disease control is maybe a concern. Are you getting pulled into is your expertise being pulled in to now look at airports and transportation systems and other ongoing projects? So, like, is there starting to be a demand to think about those aspects on projects we wouldn't normally be required to think about?
Well, the short answer is yes, Tom. You know, for assembly spaces, sports and recreation venues, airports, everywhere, you know, we're asking, how can we make those places safer and less risky for people to do what they need to do in them? I think that the answer needs to be, like, the message needs to be always that it is an interdisciplinary, you know, just like a construction site is an interdisciplinary effort, you know, creating a safe environment when there's biohazards is an interdisciplinary effort as well. And the architect engineer has a really important part to play in that, to deal with the physical environment and the engineering controls, if you will. But there's a lot of things that have to do with behavior and management of people, and sort of codifying cultural aspects of whatever is the activity that we're designing for, that needs to have sort of infection disease control or biosafety expertise involved as well, because, you know, although we can create barriers and use HVAC systems and antimicrobial surfaces to reduce the risk, at least until there's a vaccine, there will still be risk in pretty much everyone's opinion. And so how do we also manage people's behavior and and the way they act in these spaces, and how do we use PPE most effectively, which are not the architect's expertise. So it really is a matter of sitting down and figuring out the safest way to let people sort of move on with their lives in these places.
Yeah, my experience has been, when this all first happened, obviously the grocery stores were still open, and then they started limiting the number of people that could go in, and now all the aisles are one way, and all these sort of knowledge and the things that society is figuring out can be done to keep us still going to the grocery store. We need to do that, but to put together sort of common sense flows of people through public environments and that sort of thing. So I would imagine that there's going to be a lot of that type of thinking that needs to be applied to all public environments, transportation systems, airports, anywhere that you bring the general public together. Certainly, you're going to have to think about how people interact. So I'm going to move on here to Alex. Alex, I'm really glad to have an economist with us to think about this, because there's a lot of people are concerned about their jobs. They're concerned about the economy in general. And then we're obviously all thinking about our existing backlog, the projects that we have that are on the books and being planned, and whether or not those projects are going to go forward as expected, or whether or not things are going to get slowed down, and then what's over that horizon. So we look to economists to kind of predict the future here. So I'm hoping that maybe you can give us some insight on that. So you're I think you're based in the U.S. now, but you obviously cover all of North America. Generally, what have you seen around short-term and long-term effects of COVID-19?
Well, in terms of how it's affected construction starts so far, which are just the volume of starts, they're down by about a third. So it's having an impact on projects, and I would say that in the United States, there may be hanging in terms of their construction activity a little better than Canada. I think they're just naturally more optimistic. They think that this is going to turn around, and in fact, you're still here talk about a V-shaped recovery and that sort of thing. But I don't see that. I just don't see how that is going to happen, because if you look at what's going on, there are this isn't like previous recessions. I guess that's one of my main themes. You've got whole segments of the economy that just aren't functioning anymore, like travel. Air Canada's talking about letting 20,000 people go. There was a time when air traffic was about 10% of what it had been before the crisis. And it's gradually coming back. It's coming back a bit. But there's going to be an airline, at least one, that goes out of business. And if you don't have airlines, you don't have people staying in hotels. And if you don't have travel, you don't have people taking limos to the airport or renting cars. And that's why Hertz has gone out of business. And if Hertz goes out of business, they're in bankruptcy protection, but they're not going to be ordering fleets of cars from the automakers the same way. So there are all these implications throughout the economy. A part of the economy that nobody ever thinks about is that every Saturday in every big city, and probably in the world, there are banquets that are held for people who are having weddings and so on. Those things aren't happening. You're not having Canada's secret weapon as in terms of economic growth has been population growth. Canada's population has been increasing at 1.5% per year. The US has been 0.5% per year. Population growth means you have more people spending money. And right now, 80% of population growth comes from immigration. And so population growth is at a standstill. So many of the drivers of the economy simply have been removed. So I don't know how this turns around really quickly.
It's a good news story. This is the positive. It is going to, I think, from my perspective, maybe I'm an optimist, but I do think that people are ready to get out and start spending money. Like they want to get back to going to restaurants. They want to go out and socialize. They want to go replace their blue jeans or whatever the case is that they haven't been able to do. So do you think that there's pent up demand that is going to drive or restart things quickly, or do you think it's going to be a long, deep recession?
Well, yeah, you want to get out and you want to do those things, but there's Canada lost 3 million jobs. The United States lost the number of people who are applied for unemployment insurance over the last 3 months is 40 million in the United States. So if you're a government spokesman, what you're saying is a lot of those people who lost their jobs, they were in the hospitality sector. And so they were low income earners anyway, and they weren't going to buy houses and so on. Because I think one of the things that is being counted on to really get the economy going is pent up demand for housing. But again, I don't know. And in Canada, funnily enough, in Canada, the May housing start number jumped right back up to 193,000 units. It's been 200,000 units monthly on a seasonally adjusted annual basis for 10 years. And so that was good. But CMHC itself is predicting that the housing starts in Canada will drop by 50% to 75% in the second half of this year. And the thing that's going to bite the housing market eventually is the fact that there's going to be mortgage foreclosures. And Airbnb, people who have bought condos hoping that they're going to rent them out through Airbnb or whatever, well, people aren't traveling. So who are you going to rent them to? So there's overhang here, and there's going to be a recovery. Things are going to come back. There's pent up demand. People want to get out. They want to go to shows. They want to go to restaurants, but there's just an awful lot of overhang that's going to take some time to.
So it could be. Yeah, it's going to be based on each market. It's going to be a little bit different. Obviously the GTA, the vacancy rates are extremely low, and that's been driving housing starts and whatnot. And Calgary, the vacant rates are very high, so it's a different scenario market to market. And yeah, the knock-on effects are going to be deep. I agree. I mean, there are major structural issues, and what I've heard is there might be some changes to the airline industries overall. Like you might start to have global companies instead of Air Canada. You have Air World, right? And there's one company that supplies the world. So
can I add to the housing discussion a little bit, Tom?
Go ahead.
I'll pile on a little bit, but then I think there is a silver lining. So definitely, I think the immigration was a major driver of the housing in particularly Toronto and Vancouver. So not having it there definitely is not a good thing for the prospects on housing starts. But on the flip side, as you said, there was a very low vacancy rate, and there's still a pent-up demand for housing there. So it's not like it completely dries up right away. And also, it's been actually quite remarkable through all of this. We've been very busy doing estimates and pre-construction work for clients on residential projects. So a lot of the developers, they've taken this time. They haven't stopped their projects. They've gone ahead. They've done pre-construction. You might actually find that there's a big glut of launches when this is all done and people can actually go out to sales centers again. Now, the question is will there be the buyers there for them with unemployment and the drop in immigration? If there is a big volume of sales launches, do they get bought? Do they have the sales velocity that they need? And I guess that's a big open question.
Yeah, well, it's probably going to tie into your unit rates for building. I mean, if building rates come down, maybe these projects still have the margins to sell at a lower price. And maybe the longer term effect here is that land costs less, and maybe these development projects can get going for a little bit less land acquisition cost. But yeah, it is definitely an unknown. I mean, I'm not an economist, but gas is cheaper, so that's got to have everything's got to be cheaper overall.
One other thing too to consider is it's not just condos in the residential. There are pension funds with massive stockpiles of cash that have been, desperately trying to build huge volumes of rental. A lot of pent up demand to build rentals. So if the numbers get a little bit better, these pension funds, I don't need to go borrow money as long as I think long term when this is done, there's going to be renters there. I think they're a little bit more long term in their view of these things and don't have to kind of go convince a bank to give them the money. So I think that does put again, as long as there's people looking to rent places, or there will be when this is done, it puts a bit of a floor under how bad it could get.
Yeah. Well, people need to.
Tom, can I, and sorry, I've been dropping off, sort of expand the conversation a little bit beyond the residential market to some of the other markets like healthcare and life science. We did expect when the pandemic hit and there was, the economic sort of repercussions and contraction that we would be seeing a relatively lengthy pause in investment, and capital investment in infrastructure. But we've been really surprised that there was a slowdown. It did seem like all of our projects and all of our pipeline kind of went on pause and hold. But we've just in the last month or so seen a real re-energization of not only if we expected the public sector to invest, in sort of infrastructure spending, which can be in public health projects and healthcare projects and that. We expected that to happen, but we've really seen sort of the private and the institutional sector come back and start up projects too, especially the private sector. But so we've been surprised, at least in the life science and healthcare side, that we didn't expect. We're having to reforecast. We reforecasted when there was contraction, and we're having to reforecast again because. Just the behavior in the last couple of months have been sort of surprising to us.
Yeah, the stock market is recovered. Maybe it's all because of Robinhood and all the day traders that just jumped on board to replace the casinos. But it has come up quite a bit, and usually that's predicting sort of like 8-10 months in advance, right? And I've heard that what you just said, Randy, from other sources as well, where they've been surprised that either the projects in hand are trying to be accelerated because they want to take advantage of the low occupancy with the anticipation there's going to be demand for that product at the end of the project. So maybe I'll come back to Mark. Mark is and I don't know if you have perspective on it because it's not really your focus, operations and whatnot, but what's been the impact to PCL with existing projects that have been on the books and then future projects? Does it seem like the market's slowing down overall, or what's your perspective?
From what I see, certainly in my position, our clients are absolutely looking to get things done and done more quickly. There's a sense of urgency certainly to get things done. I think there's a sense that normalcy in some way, shape, or form will return. Any of us can guess what that looks like. But certainly we're seeing healthy construction volume across North America in terms of new projects coming in the pipeline as well.
Just to kind of add on to that, I think the difficulty is going to be when these projects come out to tender and we still haven't solved, there's no vaccine.
Right.
What happens? The general contractor isn't going to want to blindly take on that risk, nor should they. The risk of a project being shut down, lost productivity, all kinds of things that might add on to the cost significantly of a project. So, either you're going to, as a contractor, incorporate some of those risks and the costs in your bid and have a really high bid, or you exclude them all, download them to the owner. Now the owner's got to sit there and go, do I go ahead with this thing? Like it's very risky. I don't know what my costs are going to be. So even if there's a bunch of projects to tender, on the one hand, you've got a recession possibly bringing down some costs in some areas, but all of this unknown, unquantifiable risk, could end up making projects not viable. Maybe a bunch of them get tendered, but then get shelved because they can't figure out, what their costs are and how to mitigate those risks. It'll be interesting to see how that falls out.
So in your position at Altus, also one of the services that Altus provides is cost estimating. Are you seeing? Do you have exposure to unit rates and trends around unit rates?
Yeah.
So what are you seeing around unit rates?
Well, certainly in some areas we've seen rates soften a little bit. I guess the biggest one that's gone up over the past several years, particularly in residential high-rise, has been formwork. It's been astronomical. It's nearly doubled in the past several years. It hasn't dropped significantly, but there has been some signs of it softening a little bit.
Right.
And it's such a large trade in a high-rise residential building that it doesn't have
They're
to
almost
soften.
begging. The former companies in Toronto were almost begging to put off projects because it just didn't have the capacity to maintain quality.
My joke to owners when they tell me the unit rates, holy moly, the lowest price I got was $16 a square foot, $17 a square foot. My response is, the scary part is not the price. It's the fact that every one of your bidders were giving you a price essentially saying, I can't do this job, and you're giving them the work anyway. That's the scary part. So, if things slow down a little bit, it's maybe not all bad. Maybe those former prices,
in Toronto,
their labor problems, and they'll come back down to earth somewhat.
The Toronto market's been kind of an anomaly in Canada. Vancouver's
been similar.
Yeah, but the rest of Canada is, I'm sure that the cost per square foot for formwork in Calgary is probably like $6 right now. Who knows?
No. Well, it was never. Calgary was always higher than the rest of them. So it's definitely less, but it's maybe not as low as you might think.
Yeah.
I'm hearing a lot of wishful thinking going on here.
So Alex, I wanted to ask about, normally when we have a slowdown, the government comes out with stimulus packages and shovel-ready projects are funded. What's your perspective on the necessity of infrastructure spending and maybe the existing program there too?
Well, there's so many repercussions in every direction, but infrastructure spending, as I say, this is not a recession like a normal recession. I have always in the past been a big proponent of infrastructure projects to get the economy going again, but I'm not sure that that's the answer this time. One of the things that isn't being talked about so far is debt. There's a whole bunch of landmines, mines that you're walking across a minefield here, and people don't even realize it. There's things like propensities. What's going to happen to propensities? What are people going to do, and so on? There's the chance of like 30% of the workforce working from home, and that has huge implications as well. But anyway, we're talking about infrastructure. So yeah, well, propensity has an impact there. If people are going to be living, if they're going to be working from home, do we need to spend money on rapid transit projects? If people aren't going to be traveling around the world, do we need to have the huge expenditures on airports? If people are working from, it just goes on and on. So the traditional infrastructure projects, roads and rapid transit and airports and so on, you could end up spending a lot of money and ending up with some real white elephants. Now, the other big thing, too, is the amount of debt that is being racked up. Governments are just piling on the debt. They're not paying any attention whatsoever to their debt loads. And at some point, that's going to come back and bite them, because debt rating agencies, if they're going to do their job, they're going to have to start doing some downgrades. And so there's all the talk about how it's okay to have all this debt because interest rates are so low. But if the debt rating agencies step in and decide that your debt has gone from AAA to DEE or something, you're going to have to pay much higher interest rates. So what happens then? So I'm not sure that infrastructure, adding a whole extra level of debt through infrastructure, is the way to go. Now, China is definitely launching an infrastructure program. They're talking about spending close to $1 trillion US on infrastructure. But they have said that they're not going to spend it in traditional areas. They're going to spend it on 5G networks and data centers and biotechnology labs and all that kind of stuff. Now that has implications. That has an implication too, because then they won't be using the steel and the concrete that they've used in the past, and that affects the whole resource sector, which has implications for Canada's raw material producers.
Right. So, I mean, obviously the government borrows money to build things, but we've seen the P3 market blossom over the past 15 years, right? And we have pension funds that have to put their money somewhere. They want to continue to invest. And the government, I mean, Toronto needs infrastructure. We need more subway systems. Like, I just can't imagine that I'm going to be taking the subway. I'm going to be going to restaurants. I mean,
not if we don't have immigration. Like if immigration, if we have, Toronto has huge population increase. That's what's been fueling an awful lot of the activity in Toronto. You're talking about residential, you're talking about rental units in Toronto or throughout the country. A big chunk of that is being driven by population growth. If we get back to having population growth, yeah, we'll be in much better shape. But if it's a year or two before we get back to having 400,000. Well, the population in the last year was 500,000. That's how much
we're
the
losing you a bit,
increase
Alex.
was. And 400,000 of that was immigration.
The good news in Toronto is it's the subway system is so underinvested that you could build for decades and still not catch up to.
This is my point. I take the bus in Toronto. Trust me.
I think the difference with this debt and this spending, you know, historically when you're spending and racking up all that debt, you get something for it. You bought something, you built something. Now we've racked up unprecedented debt and there's nothing to show for it. A lot of that debt was paid to keep people at home, you know, so is there the money left to invest in those infrastructure projects? I'm sure there'll be all kinds of promises because that's kind of the MO for a politician. You have to make promises, but do they materialize in the money when you have to write the check? I guess that's a big question mark.
So maybe just an informal poll here. Who has a vacation booked in the next 12 months out of the group here? I do. I've already bought flights. I'm going to Mexico in April. So maybe not you guys, but
I'm going to restaurant. So North Carolina to cool down a bit.
I'm still looking for the insurance to pay off on the last vacation that we had to cancel to Barcelona in May. So
there you go. So David, just I don't know if you have exposure to this with the projects you're involved with at the planning stages or beyond, but have you seen a big impact to supply chain? I mean, borders are shut down. Construction has got more and more globalized. We're getting, you know, especially with the U.S., we get air handling units and pumps and all sorts of things come across the border. Have you seen that cause like material delays on job sites? What's your perspective on it?
It was certainly a big concern, and there was a lot of questions asked. I would say no, there's been no kind of consistent report of any particular equipment or material being in widespread shortage. I think a lot of the delay probably has more to do with people, you know, difficulty in getting permits approved and inspections and that type of thing because of the pandemic. But it did raise for us kind of when people started raising those questions of, oh, what happens when, you know, a huge chunk of China shut down? Does that have impacts for my project? You know, we started looking into that, even delving into Canada's international trade information and visualizing that in Tableau. And that gives you some useful areas to look into, but you really can't pinpoint, you know, in that trade data, where is rebar? You know, it's in a group with other metal products. So you can start to kind of do a heat map of what things might be coming from what regions, but ultimately, you know, maybe it points you in the right direction, but you've got to dig into the details of your individual project. And there's probably essentially nobody that knows where all the stuff is coming from on a project. And maybe we should, or maybe we should for the major ones.
There's a real lack of data related to supply chain in general on projects. I mean, owners don't know where all the components of their final product come from. And it's very difficult to trace it at the end of the job, let alone, you know, real time to understand the status of things. So Mark, at PCL, you've deployed, you have a deep relationship with Microsoft. You have a deep relationship with Autodesk. You're using all sorts of really sophisticated mobile tools on job sites to track quality, deficiencies. Are you using that technology to track supply chain and tying that into a data strategy so you have perspective on deliveries and delays and kind of can predict things? What are you working on that front?
Yeah, I mean, our procurement group is very distributed by district office, so we don't have centralized procurement per se for all of our job sites. We tend to procure locally, and so our local jurisdictions really have a good handle on where material is coming from, because a lot of it's coming from local distributors. Certainly, we buy things that are not local where it can't be supplied, and we do have good oversight on that. But we've got an internal committee that I don't personally sit on, but that has really good insight on where our materials are coming from and if there's shortages or delays. And you guys will all laugh at this, but the biggest thing that we've had issues with is in getting is hand sanitizer and masks. Right?
That's not funny. That's normal.
Generally speaking, we've been in really good shape for hats off to our folks that operate in our procurement departments across North America. They've done a really great job of keeping us steady. So
there's a fair amount of resiliency then. I mean, most of the things that we build with are commodities, and if you can't get it from one source, you can go to the next source.
Exactly.
And the general contractor, for the most part, pushes down in the way we operate, anyways. We push that material purchasing requirements down to our subtrades who go out and procure the material directly. So it doesn't always roll up to be our problem, but we would certainly benefit from more data and probably volume consolidation around our purchasing.
Yeah, Tom, I think to your point there, I was just going to say, I mean, really what the pandemic has exposed, I mean, one of your first questions is, what have we changed from technology? Certainly, we had great communication technology in place, but what we are finding is construction is probably one of the most under-digitized businesses in the world. We've been doing things for hundreds and thousands of years, and things that we do today, we've done for 50, 60, 70 years. But what it has exposed is that there are opportunities certainly to drive insights and productivity efficiency gains through the use of data, through the use of information systems. And so I know we and a lot of those in our peer group are certainly looking at this as an opportunity to enhance the capability of technology in the industry, which is, I think, is a great thing.
I'm not sure if you're.
I think it's the same. I think it's the same on the consulting side too. Perhaps we were more digitized and we are communication based, Mark. But I think that we're really seeing this as an opportunity to rethink how we do business and what is the purpose of sort of working in place too.
So I was going to ask Mark. PCL has a prefabrication plant in the GTA, and I think potentially out in Alberta as well. Is there new business driving towards an offsite strategy because of COVID, just because of the more, say, predictable nature of offsite fabrication? I'm not sure if you're exposed to that part of PCL or not, but.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, with the consortium today, we launched the Citizen Care Pods, which is built by us in our modular facilities. And we have modular facilities all across North America, not just Toronto and Edmonton. So we have the capability through our industrial business and our buildings business to build agile, if you will. And certainly, I know it's a strong buzzword in the industry right now. We've been doing agile construction out of Toronto for a long time now.
10 years at least.
But I think the uniqueness of construction too poses challenges, certainly in building that way. The uniqueness of every client and every owner's needs in terms of what they want in a building. And so, while certain things will absolutely make sense for agile construction, a lot of things will not. But certainly, I think we'll see a change in that focus in the coming years as well. What that looks like, again, I don't have a crystal ball. But certainly it is becoming a hot topic recently, Tom.
Randy, with your exposure within HOK, are you seeing a lot of projects emerge to reconfigure existing office spaces or create gateways or additional sort of screening gateways to get people to prepare for people going back into the office environment. What type of new work are you seeing emerge that is specifically related to addressing getting back to work with C-19 still floating around?
Well, every company that has employees that work in a workplace together is rethinking what is the nature of workplace for the future. And I think that what has emerged is there's really two sets of calculations or two sets of strategies to make. One is, what do we need to do to keep our workforce as cohesive and culturally connected until there's a vaccine? And then also, what is the nature of work and workplace once there is a vaccine? I think that what most places and organizations are saying, is, and there is no one sort of, everyone's going in a certain direction, but most are saying that we're going to de-densify the workplace, while there isn't a vaccine, because I will say, it being my business, I can say without hesitation that it's not possible to have people working in place with zero risk. I mean, that just is, I think that's self-evident, and I think that's common sense, right? That as soon as we bring people together to work together again, there is risk to that. But so the short-term strategies are adding more contactless technology where possible, changing cultural practices like everyone sharing the water cooler, sharing the coffee maker, etc. Looking at different strategies to, if you will, protocol out, sort of what are clear places where contact was encouraged and now needs to be discouraged, and that's kind of the cultural things that I was talking about needing to be revisited. We're not a huge proponent of installing barriers everywhere in the offices and sort of doing, massive, if you will, physical changes to the environment short term, because we really think that, we have to be careful that we're not overspending short term if it's not really the right solution for what the workplace looks like once there's a vaccine.
Yeah, that kind of ties into what I want to ask everybody, is what, we're seeing changes, we're seeing impact. What changes are we seeing from each one of your perspectives that are temporary, that are until we get back to the normal, whenever that's going to be, versus things that are more structural and will be lasting effects that we're going to see not change and stick around, whether it's behavioral or economic or IT related. So maybe I'll just to wrap up, because we are going to run out of time, but I'll give you guys each like a minute or two. But yeah, so Alex, short-term versus long-term structural effects. What do you think?
Well, one of the questions, one of the things that we were talking about, office buildings. In terms of categories of construction, I think office buildings is maybe the most interesting, because if you're a developer right now, you've got to be figuring pretty hard about how you're going to convince tenants to keep paying the rents that they are, because something like 30% of the workforce can stay at home. And in the United States, I'd be interested to know whether the other panelists have heard about this, but in the United States, some people are returning to work and they're being asked to sign liability waivers. So is that going to be part of the changing landscape? But the big thing really is propensities over the longer term. Like at the moment, people don't want to gather in groups and so on. But how long is it going to be before people get back to thinking, well, it's okay to go ahead and mix with everybody? Because something like shopping malls, you got to understand that the shopping malls, the reason shopping malls are filled on the weekends is partly because people are going there to buy things, but it's also because for an awful lot of people, going to the mall is their entertainment. And so long term, I think things like that probably aren't going to change as long as there is a vaccine and so on. So you got to look at who we are as human beings, and that influences your expectations longer term.
But you could look at Trinity Bellwoods Park in Toronto. They opened it up the next day. It was rammed with people.
Yep.
That was a mistake, obviously, the way they opened it up. But I got to believe that there's a whole cohort of especially young people that just want to get out and socialize, right? And when you look at spending, I mean, you know this better than I do, but when you look at disposable income and spending, it does tend to be that cohort that goes out and spends money on all these recreational activities.
Just for the office one, I do think it's interesting, and it's kind of a good example of what lasts and what's short term. I think the distancing, the minute there's a vaccine and the kind of memory starts to fade, because the memories fade and people aren't as worried about the distancing anymore, but also because we're in a market economy, especially in businesses where the bulk of your expenses is people and office space, like HOK, like Altus. You can't afford to be spending double the cost on your office space if your competitors aren't. You just can't stay competitive. And then you've got this other, so I think eventually they're going to have the same densities they did before, as long as there's a vaccine.
So maybe but
the thing that sticks is the working from home. Like as a manager, I've totally changed my opinion of working from home. And frankly, it's been a huge quality of life increase, not being packed in the subway like an urban cow for 2 hours a day, and spending 2 hours with my kids instead. So, I have no intention of going back to the office 5 days a week. And frankly, it doesn't really matter what my employer says. I'm not doing it. And I think there's a lot, and I think a lot of employers won't want you to do it. They can save money. So I think that sticks.
Could solve the traffic problem as well, potentially, which would be great.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a long-term effect, is the flexible work environment. And even if maybe there's not a reduction in the square footages that you have for your office space, maybe it's just a reduction in density, and you have a more flexible environment where less people are coming in and out and checking in desks. So everybody's office looks more like a WeWork than a regular office. So Mark, maybe over to you. Short-term, temporary effects, and maybe long-term effects that stick across the board.
I think humans have a short memory. I mean, this isn't the first world pandemic. A vaccine will come. I think things will normalize eventually. There's all of us here are probably a sports fan in some way, shape, or form. People want to get out. They want to see a game. They want to see a concert. They want to go to a movie. Will the work environment change? Probably. I think every, depending on your role and what you do in the workforce, I think there'll be more flexible arrangements than there are currently in the future, and that may bode well for employees and employers. What that looks like and how companies shape that, to be determined. I know none of us probably have it figured out. We're probably all thinking about what that looks like and how to plan for it. But right now, it's day by day, week by week, month by month, and we'll see where we are. And everyone's crystal ball is probably a little bit foggy right now, but certainly, modern communication, modern times have all of us thinking about what the future might look like, and we could have it on the agenda for next year. Let's see where we're at.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, our industry is usually kind of last to be hit, and the gestation on these projects are so long. Like, it takes years to design a sports stadium, and I think we can all agree that we're going to get back to some sort of sense of normal at some point. And if it takes 3 years to design and 3 years to build a sports stadium, if you're in the business of building and procuring sports stadiums, you got to start thinking about it right now, regardless. So, there is going to be work that floats us through. And my opinion is that's sort of what happened in 2008. It was a short recession, and the construction industry did fairly well, at least in Canada, through that with the infrastructure spending. So, Randy, maybe close us out here with your answer to my question, which is, what do you think are the short-term effects and what are the long-term effects?
So I do think that it's been a human toll, this working in place and not being able to socialize. I think that we're all feeling the effects, sort of they're subtle, emotional, and psychological, of not being able to connect with people. So I think that's another way of saying I think there will be this pent-up demand to have social contact when it's safe to do. I think that, again, I'll reiterate that until there's a vaccine, there really isn't a way to safely engineer an environment to eliminate risks. So that will always be a risk calculation by every company. I do think also this is a chance to pause and reset and rethink about what work looks like in the future. I will say that there are companies that are doubling down on working in place and the workplace and coming together. Not every institution and company is saying this is absolutely a case where I can just eliminate half of my real estate portfolio. We're seeing all different kinds of calculations in terms of what is the value of workplace and physical workplace. So there's a lot of work to do, and it'll take a real a team to design that future. But it's a chance to step back and design the future of it.
Yeah.
And I'll just put a plug lastly for more investment in public health. Be it research, infrastructure, supply chains, etc. What this has taught us too is that we've been underfunding public health, over the last decade.
Absolutely.
Maybe more on my side of the border than yours.
Especially down south, yeah. Okay, well, I really want to thank everyone for participating. I hope that you guys got as much out of this as I did, and I hope that our audience did too. I'm going to probably volunteer that everybody is available to talk to. If the audience wants to find you on LinkedIn or whatever the case is, please keep the conversation going. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to participate and volunteer